Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where hearts find their voice and love writes its own destiny. Today's tale is one of fate, timing, and an unexpected knock that changed 2 lives forever. Sit back, immerse yourself, and let the story unfold. It was a rainy evening when Amara, exhausted after a long day, mistakenly knocked on the wrong apartment door. Instead of finding her friend's place, she was greeted by Aiden, a man whose presence commanded attention, the CEO of a leading multinational company. At first, the encounter was awkward. She apologized. He smiled politely. Yet something unspoken lingered in the air. That single knock, meant for someone else, became the doorway to an uncharted love story. The rain fell in soft silver sheets, blurring the city lights into a dreamy haze. Drops clung to window panes like tiny jewels, and the rhythm of water on rooftops played a melancholy symphony. Amara tightened her coat around her, her hair damp and cheeks flushed from the cold. She wasn't supposed to be here. Lost in a neighborhood she didn't know, clutching a small box meant for her best friend's birthday. The directions had gotten muddled, and her phone battery had given up its last breath an hour ago. Frustrated but determined, she scanned the apartment numbers, her breath curling in the air like smoke. She stopped at a door. Apartment 9B. Yes, this must be it. She knocked softly at first, then firmer when there was no answer. The door swung open with a swiftness that startled her, and suddenly she was staring into eyes she would never forget. Dark, sharp, commanding, eyes that seemed to pierce through her defenses yet softened when they rested on her. The man standing there was unlike anyone she had ever seen outside glossy magazines. His presence was magnetic, the kind that filled the room before he even spoke. Broad shoulders framed by a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, tie slightly loosened as if he had just stepped away from a boardroom. His jawline was sharp, his hair perfectly in place, though a single rebellious strand fell across his forehead. Yes. His voice was deep, smooth, carrying authority like a melody born of power and elegance. Amara's heart skipped. I'm sorry, she stammered, holding up the box in her hands. I think I was looking for my friend's apartment. I must have gotten the wrong door. His lips curved, just slightly, into a smile that could melt even the iciest winter night. Clearly, he said, glancing at the package. But I don't mind mistakes like this. Embarrassed, Amara took a step back, fumbling for words. She was drenched, tired, and now standing in front of a stranger whose mere presence made her pulse race. She should have walked away, apologized once more, and vanished into the rainy evening. But something in his gaze held her there, an invisible tether that refused to let go. Why don't you step inside for a moment, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes carrying something far deeper. You look like you could use warmth. Her instincts screamed caution, but her heart whispered curiosity. Against her better judgment, Amara accepted. She stepped into his apartment and the world shifted. The place was breathtaking, minimalist yet luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the rain-slicked skyline, the city glowing like a constellation of gold. Every detail spoke of sophistication: polished marble floors, modern art adorning the walls, and soft amber lighting that wrapped the space in elegance. It wasn't just a home. It was a sanctuary designed for someone accustomed to commanding empires. Let me guess, he said, loosening his cufflinks, his movements deliberate, graceful. You were searching for 9C, not 9B. Amara's eyes widened. How did you know? This smile deepened, this time warm and disarming. Because everyone who comes here by mistake is usually looking for your friend in 9C. She must be quite popular. A relief washed over her and she laughed, a soft, musical sound that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. For a man who had lived years in silence filled with business meetings and shallow conversations, her laughter felt like the first real melody in a long time. I'm Aiden, he finally introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip was firm yet gentle, his touch sending an unexplainable warmth through her. Amara, she replied, her voice steady now though her heart still raced. And just like that, something unspoken began between them. She should have left then, taken her package and hurried to the correct door, but instead, she found herself sitting on his leather sofa, sipping tea he insisted on making for her. Their conversation flowed as if they weren't strangers at all. He asked about her work, her dreams, her love for art and poetry. She asked nothing about him, yet the aura around him whispered stories of power, wealth, and influence. There was a mystery to him, a man carved from stone but softened by curiosity for the woman fate had brought to his doorstep. Time stretched. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, a different kind of storm brewed. One of emotions neither of them had anticipated. Aiden studied her every gesture, the way she tucked her damp hair behind her ear, the way her fingers traced the rim of the teacup, the honesty in her eyes. She wasn't trying to impress him, she didn't even know who he truly was. And that, more than anything, made her presence magnetic. For Amara, she felt something she couldn't name. The man before her radiated power, yet he carried it with quiet grace. She should have felt intimidated, but instead she felt seen, as though in that vast, echoing apartment she wasn't invisible. When she finally stood to leave, her box clutched tightly once more, he walked her to the door. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the air fresh with the scent of new beginnings. She smiled politely, ready to thank him and vanish back into her ordinary world. But Aiden's voice stopped her. "Amara," he said softly, her name rolling off his tongue as though he had known it for years. "Sometimes, the wrong door leads us exactly where we're meant to be." Her heart trembled. She didn't know it then, but that single knock, the one born of mistake, drenched in rain, was the first page of a story that would rewrite both their lives. The days after that fateful evening unfolded like chapters written by destiny itself. Amara often told herself that it was nothing. A coincidence, a chance encounter that would fade as quickly as the rain that night. And yet, her mind replayed every detail, the warmth of his voice, the depth in his eyes, the strange comfort she felt in the presence of a stranger who somehow didn't feel like one at all. For Aiden, the memory of her laugh lingered long after she left. He had attended countless board meetings, signed billion-dollar contracts, and walked into rooms where his very name caused silence. But never had a single sound lingered in his mind the way her laughter did. It wasn't polished, rehearsed, or designed to please, it was real. And for a man who had lived too long in a world of masks and calculated words, that authenticity was irresistible. Their second meeting was not planned. Amara once again found herself in the same building, this time intentionally knocking on her friend's door. But fate, mischievous and relentless, orchestrated their paths once more. As she stepped out of the elevator, clutching a folder of sketches she was working on for a small freelance project, the doors opened on another floor, and there he was. Aiden, sharp suit, briefcase in hand, aura commanding as ever. But when his eyes landed on her, the CEO disappeared, and the man who had once served her tea at midnight smiled with undeniable warmth. "Amara," he said, as though her name itself was a melody he had been waiting to hear again. Her heart skipped. "Mers Aiden," she replied, fumbling, suddenly self-conscious of her modest clothes against his polished presence. He chuckled softly, the sound low and rich. "Just Aiden." From that moment, their worlds, though starkly different, began to overlap in ways neither could control. Amara's world was simple. She lived in a rented apartment where the paint on the walls was beginning to chip. She worked long hours as a freelance illustrator, sometimes earning enough, sometimes barely enough to cover rent. Her joys were small but meaningful. Hot tea at dawn, sketching by candlelight, the comfort of old books that smelled of history. Aiden's world was the opposite. His days were measured in stock reports and press releases. His nights were spent in glass towers that overlooked cities, his name appearing in business magazines and financial headlines. Luxury was his everyday reality: private cars, exclusive galas, vacations on islands most people never heard of. They should have been strangers to each other, divided by invisible walls of class and circumstance. And yet, when they spoke, those walls crumbled. One evening, he invited her to dinner, not at a 5-star restaurant, but at a quiet cafe tucked into the heart of the city. He had insisted that he wanted to see her world, instead of dazzling her with his. Amara was surprised, unsure, even hesitant, but she agreed. They sat by the window, the smell of freshly baked bread surrounding them, candles flickering between their plates. Aiden listened as she talked about her dreams, her struggles, her longing to make art that touched hearts. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions as CEOs so often did. He just listened, truly listened, as though every word she spoke was precious. "Do you know," he said softly, "that in my world, people rarely talk about dreams. We talk about profits, risks, strategies, but dreams." He leaned forward, his gaze steady on hers. "I think I forgot what it meant to dream until I met you." Her cheeks warmed, not from flattery, but from the sincerity in his tone. For the first time, she realized that behind his tailored suits and unshakable confidence was a man who was quietly lonely, a man who had built empires yet longed for something money could not buy: authentic connection. Still, their differences did not go unnoticed. Amara felt out of place in his circles. When he took her once to a charity gala, she wore her best dress, a modest, elegant gown she had saved for years. But among women dripping in diamonds and men who spoke in terms of investments and mergers, she felt like an intruder. Whispered glances followed her, subtle smiles that mocked her simplicity. Aiden noticed. He leaned down, close enough that only she could hear. "Ignore them," he whispered, his hand brushing against hers. "They see money. I see you. And trust me, you're the rarest luxury in this room." Her heart softened. In that moment, the gilded walls of high society couldn't cage her insecurities, because his words reminded her that love, not wealth, was the true treasure. Their bond deepened with every encounter. For Amara, Aiden became more than the CEO she had once stumbled upon. He was the man who showed up at her small art exhibition, quietly bidding on every piece so she wouldn't leave empty-handed. He was the man who called her late at night just to ask, "What did you sketch today?" For Aiden, Amara became more than the girl with the mistaken knock. She was the voice that grounded him, the reason he looked forward to something beyond business, the reminder that even CEOs needed a home for their hearts. And so, though they lived in worlds apart, they were drawn together by something stronger than circumstance, by a love that saw through status, wealth, and fear. Because destiny had written their story not in contracts or balance sheets, but in the language of hearts that recognized each other in the most unlikely places. Love has a way of softening the sharpest hearts, but it also has a way of testing them. For Amara and Aiden, the beginnings of their relationship felt like walking into a dream. Their conversations lingered past midnight, their laughter filled silences that once echoed with emptiness, and their eyes often found each other even in crowded places. Yet, behind the romance that sparkled like crystal chandeliers, shadows of reality crept in, shadows that whispered of the differences that divided their worlds. It began subtly. Whispers at business gatherings, murmurs among Aiden's colleagues, curious looks that quickly turned into condescending smiles. For the powerful CEO, every step was scrutinized by an audience that thrived on perfection. To them, Amara was an outsider, a woman of modest background with no pedigree of wealth, no last name etched in history, no empire to her credit. At first, Amara ignored it. She reminded herself that her bond with Aiden was personal, untouched by the gossip of strangers. But the more she stepped into his world, the heavier the burden became. At charity galas, she felt eyes tracing the seams of her simple gowns. At board dinners, her silence was misinterpreted as ignorance, her laughter seen as unsophisticated. One evening, as they stepped out of a luxury hotel after an event, Amara caught fragments of a conversation between two women. "She's beautiful, yes," one whispered, her diamond necklace shimmering under the lights, "but do you really see her as CEO's wife material? She doesn't fit." Those words dug deep, like thorns hidden in a bed of roses. Amara walked silently beside Aiden, her hand in his, but her heart felt heavy. When they reached his car, he noticed her quietness. "You heard them, didn't you?" Aiden's voice was calm, but his jaw clenched. Amara tried to smile. "It doesn't matter." But it did. It mattered because love might be blind, but society was not. Aiden, however, was unshaken. His world had always been filled with expectations. How he should run his company, who he should be seen with, even who he should love. But for the first time, he rebelled against all of it. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly before them, Aiden took her hand. His eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, softened with a rare vulnerability. "Amara," he said, his voice steady, "I know this isn't easy for you. I know people talk, they whisper, they judge. But let me tell you something. Power means nothing if I cannot use it to protect the woman I love. Let them talk, let them doubt. The truth is, I don't care. You came into my life by mistake, yes. But losing you would be the greatest mistake I could ever make." His words wrapped around her like a shield. Her eyes stung with tears, but not from sadness, from the overwhelming realization that she mattered more to him than the empire he had built brick by brick. Still, the battles were not only external. Amara wrestled with her own doubts. She often wondered if she could truly belong in his world. Could she walk beside him without feeling small in comparison? Could her love ever be enough for a man who had everything? On nights when insecurity gnawed at her, she sketched alone in her apartment. Yet, without fail, her phone would buzz, and Aiden's voice would fill the silence. "What did you draw today?" he would ask, and she would describe her sketches, scenes of love, of courage, of two figures walking hand in hand against the odds. He would listen captivated, as though her art were the only truth worth knowing. In those moments she remembered why she stayed. Because with him, she was not the poor girl and he the billionaire. She was simply Amara, and he was simply Aiden, a man who had found his home in her smile. But fate is rarely kind to those who dare to love beyond society's rules. There came a day when rumors spread through the media, questioning their relationship. Headlines speculated, analysts mocked, and pictures of them together were scrutinized as though their love were a scandal. Amara, shaken, confronted Aiden. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "Maybe I don't belong in your world. Maybe I'm holding you back." His response was immediate. He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. You are not holding me back. You are the reason I'm moving forward. Before you, I lived for success. Since you, I live for love. And trust me, love is the only empire worth ruling." Her tears spilled then, not from weakness, but from the fierce certainty that their love, though tested, was unbreakable. And so, through every whisper, every judgment, every shadow of doubt, they chose each other. Their struggles did not weaken their bond, they carved it into something stronger, like gold purified in fire. Because true love is not proven in comfort, it is proven in storms. And Amara and Aiden, though worlds apart, were bound together by a love that refused to surrender. The greatest love stories are not measured in fireworks alone, but in the subtle, breathtaking ways two hearts transform each other. For Amara and Aiden, what began as an accidental meeting had grown into something far greater, a love that did not just unite them, but reshaped them. Aiden was a man who once lived inside skyscrapers, his life a calendar of meetings, mergers, and milestones. Every morning he woke to schedules designed by assistants. Every night he returned to an empty penthouse that overlooked a glittering city, but felt colder than marble. Success had made him powerful, but it had also made him hollow. Amara entered that world like a quiet dawn. She did not arrive with grand speeches or dazzling promises. She came with warmth, with laughter, with honesty. She reminded him that there was life outside the boardroom, that there were sunsets worth pausing for, that silence could be comforting when shared with someone who truly cared. It was Amara who noticed how rarely Aiden allowed himself to rest. One evening, she found him still at his desk at midnight, tie loosened, eyes shadowed with fatigue. She walked in without a word, placed a steaming mug of camel tea beside him, and gently closed the file he was studying. "Even kings need to sleep," she whispered with a teasing smile. For a man unaccustomed to tenderness, that moment lingered. No one had dared tell him to stop, to care for himself, to live for more than endless ambition. Her presence became his quiet sanctuary, her words his anchor when the world demanded more of him than any one man could give. But Amara, too, changed. She had always been gentle, creative, with dreams woven into sketches and stories, yet she often lived small, too afraid to believe her art mattered. With Aiden, she learned to see herself differently. When she doubted her worth, he reminded her, "You don't have to belong to their world. Amara, they have wealth, but you have soul, and that is priceless." He began attending her small exhibitions, standing in front of her work with the same reverence others reserved for masterpieces in museums. When critics overlooked her, he never did. When buyers hesitated, he encouraged. Slowly, her name began to spread, not because of his wealth, but because of her own undeniable talent, nurtured by the confidence his love had given her. One evening, after selling her first painting at a respected gallery, Amara turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Aiden kissed her hand and smiled. "That's what love is, isn't it? To see the masterpiece even when the canvas is still unfinished." Their love wasn't about gifts of gold or diamonds, though Aiden could have easily adorned her in both. Instead, it was in the little rituals they created together. Walks in the rain where he insisted on carrying her umbrella. Nights on her small apartment floor, eating takeout from paper boxes, laughing at old films. Times when he'd leave her handwritten notes tucked between her sketchbooks. "The world may not see your magic yet, but I do." Amara gave him back his humanity. Aiden gave her wings to fly. Yet the most profound transformation was not in their habits or routines, but in their hearts. Aiden, once ruthless in business, began to soften. Board members noticed he was no longer the man who cut down competitors without a second thought. He still commanded respect, but his decisions carried empathy. "People," he told his executives one morning, "are not just numbers. We forget that at our own peril." Those words shocked many, but they were born from nights spent with Amara, who reminded him of the value of kindness in a world consumed by greed. Amara, on the other hand, grew stronger. Where once she had bowed her head under the weight of others' judgment, she began to stand taller. She no longer feared walking beside him at events, no longer let whispers break her spirit. She knew who she was, and she knew what she meant to him. The girl who once doubted her place in his world became the woman who walked confidently into any room, knowing she was loved beyond measure. Together, they transformed love itself into something sacred. It wasn't just passion, it was purpose. It wasn't just desire, it was destiny. And perhaps the most telling symbol of their transformation came one evening when Aiden surprised Amara with a visit to her childhood home. The modest house with peeling paint, the narrow streets she had grown up on. It was a world far from his towers of glass. Yet he walked those streets with her hand in his, meeting the neighbors, listening to her stories with reverence. At the end of the night, as they sat on the worn steps of her old porch, Amara leaned against him and whispered, "Do you ever regret it, Aiden? Choosing me, when you could have had anyone from your world?" He turned to her, his gaze unwavering, his voice steady and sure. "Amara, you didn't just change my world, you gave me a new one. And I will never regret that. You are the only decision in my life that makes me feel whole." Her eyes glistened with tears, her heart swelling with the kind of love that doesn't just live in the present, it writes itself into eternity. Because in the end, their love was not about escaping who they were, but about becoming the best of who they could be. He, the powerful CEO who learned the meaning of gentleness. She, the simple artist who discovered her strength. Together, they proved that love, when true, does not just bind, it transforms. It all began with a simple knock, one born of confusion and rain. Yet as the months unfolded, that single mistake grew into the heartbeat of a love story that would forever alter two lives. Amara often thought back to that night. The way her fingers trembled against the polished wood of Aiden's door. The way her heart raced when his commanding presence filled the doorway. What she hadn't known then was that the universe had nudged her in the wrong direction, so she could finally find the right one. That very door, once belonging to a stranger, became the place she returned to again and again. At first, it was with hesitant footsteps, unsure of what their bond might become, uncertain if she truly belonged in his luminous world. But over time, her visits became natural, her presence expected. It was as if the universe had always meant for her to belong there, only waiting for the right moment to open the path. For Aiden, that door became more than just an entrance to his penthouse. It was a threshold between the life he had lived before Amara and the life he could no longer imagine without her. Each time she stepped through, the sterile coldness of his apartment dissolved into warmth. Her laughter filled the high ceilings. Her sketchbooks lay scattered on his designer coffee table. Her presence gave life to the empty walls, painting them with love and authenticity that no art collection ever could. But the true beauty was not in the door itself, it was in what it represented. It symbolized a choice. Aiden, who had once lived behind walls of steel and glass, who had kept the world out with a fortress of power and wealth, had left this door open for her. She was the only one who walked through without knocking, the only one whose presence he welcomed at any hour in any mood. Amara realized this one evening when she arrived unannounced. She had been battling doubts again? Whispers from people who told her she would never be enough for a man like him. Rain clung to her hair just as it had that first night, and tears clouded her vision. She expected resistance, perhaps annoyance at her sudden arrival. But as soon as she reached his door, before she could even raise her hand to knock, it opened. Aiden stood there, as though he had been waiting for her all along. "You don't have to knock anymore," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "This door will always be open, for you." Those words carved themselves into her heart. For a woman who had always lived cautiously, afraid of being out of place, that promise was her homecoming. Over time, that promise became their foundation. The world still whispered. There were still nights when Amara questioned whether love was strong enough to silence the noise outside. But then she would return to that door, to the man who waited for her inside, and she knew the answer. It wasn't the absence of storms that defined their love. It was the certainty that his door, his heart, would always remain open to her. And Aiden, for him, Amara was no longer the girl who had knocked by mistake. She was the woman who had walked through the wrong door, but carried the right key all along, the key to his soul. 1 year after their first meeting, Aiden decided to remind her of how far they had come. He invited her to his apartment one evening, telling her only to dress in something you love, not what the world expects. When she arrived, nervous but curious, she found the penthouse transformed. The lights were dimmed, candles flickered across the marble counters, and rose petals traced a path from the entrance to the balcony. There, overlooking the glittering skyline, stood Aiden in a simple suit, not the armor of a CEO, but the attire of a man ready to bare his heart. "Amara," he said softly, his voice steady yet trembling with emotion. "The night you knocked on my door, I didn't know it then, but you opened something inside me I thought was lost forever. You turned this place into a home, and you turned me into a man who finally knows what it means to love. And I promise you, this door, my heart, my life, will never close to you." He dropped to one knee, a small velvet box in hand. The diamond inside sparkled, yes, but Amara barely saw it. What she saw instead were his eyes that held sincerity, devotion, and an unspoken plead. "Stay." Her hands trembled, her breath caught. Tears spilled freely as she whispered the only answer her heart could give. "Yes." From that night forward, the story of She Knocked on the Wrong Door was no longer about chance. It was about destiny. The world could gossip, society could doubt, but Amara and Aiden knew the truth sometimes. The wrong door leads to the right forever. And so, the door that had once been the beginning of a mistake became their eternal symbol of love. A door that never closed, a door that always stayed open, a door that led not just to an apartment but to a life built together, hand in hand, heart to heart. And so, what began as a mistake, one soft knock on the wrong door, became the beginning of a love that neither fate nor fortune could deny. Amara and Aiden's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive uninvited, and that love often finds us when we least expect it. It wasn't wealth, status, or circumstance that bound them together, but the quiet certainty that they had finally found home in each other's hearts. He, the man who had everything yet nothing without love. She, the woman who thought she had little, but gave him the greatest treasure of all, a reason to live beyond success. Their journey was not free of challenges. Society judged, whispers surrounded them, and insecurities tested their strength. Yet, through every storm, their love endured, transforming them both into stronger, softer, braver versions of themselves. And so the door that Amara once knocked on by accident became a door that never closed, a door to love, to belonging, and to forever. Dear listeners, may this story remind you that sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destiny, and that love, once found, has the power to rewrite every chapter of our lives. Thank you for listening to Veiled Narrative Stories. Until we meet again, remember, your story may already be waiting for you, just one door away.